Wyoming Territory, June 1883, the chickens were raising hell again. Gideon Hartley cursed under his breath as he pushed the barn door open and strode toward the pen, boots crunching over dry straw and dust. Sunlight caught the edge of his rifle slung over his back. He had not seen a coyote in weeks, but something was sure riling the hens. He rounded the rickety gate, then stopped cold. A girl was crouched in the corner of the chicken pen, half hidden behind the coop wall. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, filthy with mud and dried blood. Her dark hair clung to her face, and her eyes, sharp and unflinching, met his like a blade to the gut. "I do not want food," she said before he could speak. "I want revenge." Gideon blinked. "What?" She stood slowly, steadying herself on the wall. "Are you the one who owns this land?" "I am. I need your help." He looked her over, taking in the bruises on her arms, the dried blood along her temple. She was young, no child, but barely past womanhood, maybe 20 at most. Her voice was firm, but her knees shook. "You are bleeding," he said, stepping forward. "I said I do not want food," she snapped. "I need someone with a horse, a gun, someone who knows this land." Gideon stared at her for a moment longer, then reached to unlatch the gate. "Come inside," he said. "You can tell me who you are once you stop scaring my hens to death." She hesitated, then nodded once. He opened the gate and helped her through. Inside the cabin, she stood near the hearth while he poured water into a bowl and set out a clean cloth. She refused to sit, but let him clean the cut on her head. Her jaw tightened each time the cloth touched her skin, but she did not complain. "My name is Verona Jessup," she said finally. Gideon glanced up. "You got family nearby?" "No," she said. "Not anymore." He waited. "A week ago, my father's farm was burned down. Riders came through in the night, took the horses, killed him. Took my little sister, Abigail. She is only 9. Gideon's hand stilled on the cloth. "I tracked them," Verona went on. "I followed the signs. They split off 2 days ago. One rider went west with something small tied to his saddle. I think it was her. The others kept heading south." "Did you tell the sheriff?" "There is no sheriff anymore. The town's too small. Folks are too afraid. I came this way because I heard someone out here helped defend the stage line last winter. That man had a scar on his left hand and a red roan with a white blaze." Gideon held up his left hand. A jagged white line ran across the palm. "That was me." Verona's shoulders dropped just a little. "Then you are the one I need." Gideon walked to the window and looked out at the hills. Summer had dried the grass to gold. The shadows of the mountains stretched long across the land. "You said they went south." "Yes. I know those trails, but if we are going after them, you need rest." "You will not make it another mile like this." She looked like she might argue, but then her legs buckled slightly beneath her. Gideon caught her before she hit the floor. He lifted her easily, her weight light against his arms, and carried her to the cot near the back of the cabin. "I am not made of glass," she murmured. "You are still bleeding," he said. She looked up at him, her eyes fierce, but something in her gaze softened. "I will give you half a day," she said. "Then we ride." Gideon nodded. Half a day. When he left the room, he found himself standing at the doorway longer than he meant to, staring out at the land. He had lived alone here for 6 years, since the war ended, since he buried his brother. Quiet suited him. He had not expected a girl with fire in her eyes and bloody knuckles to show up in his chicken pen. He had not expected to care. By dawn, Verona was on her feet again, her dress mended with a needle and thread she had found in his cupboard. She braided her hair tightly down her back, tied a bandage around her arm, and said, "Let us go." They rode out with canteens tied to their saddles and rifles strapped behind their backs. Gideon brought the red roan and a sturdy black mare for her. Verona did not wait for him to help her mount. She swung into the saddle with practiced ease. They followed the trail south through the hills, past dry creeks and scattered cottonwoods. Verona pointed out the broken branches, the overturned stone where a horse had slipped. She was tracking with a skill that surprised him. "You said you followed them on foot?" Gideon asked. I grew up on this land, she said. My father taught me to read it. They camped that night near a stream. Verona sat across from him, nursing a cup of coffee, her eyes never resting long in one spot. You have done this before, Gideon said, watching her. She looked up. Done what? Watched for danger. She hesitated, then nodded. My father taught us to be careful. Ever since my mother died. Gideon poked at the fire with a stick. I lost my brother at Shiloh, came back to nothing but a burned-out house. Verona met his gaze. Then you know why I cannot let her be taken. I do. They slept under the stars that night, rifles close at hand. Gideon woke once to find Verona sitting up, arms wrapped around her knees, staring into the dark. He sat up beside her. You should sleep. I see her in my head, she said quietly. My sister. I see her calling for me. Gideon touched her arm gently. We are going to find her. The next day they reached the edge of a canyon. Hoofprints led down into the narrow pass. At the base of the trail they found an old campsite still warm. Verona knelt and picked up a small ribbon, pink and frayed. She was here, she whispered. They moved fast after that. Gideon took the lead, rifle ready, heart pounding. The trail twisted through brush and stone until finally they spotted smoke curling from a campfire ahead. One man, Verona whispered. That is the one who split off. Gideon nodded. Stay back. I am not staying anywhere. Before he could stop her, she stepped forward, rifle raised. The man by the fire looked up, then reached for his gun. Gideon fired once. The man dropped. They rushed into the camp. A small figure huddled under a blanket at the base of a tree, tied at the ankles. Verona fell to her knees, pulling the girl into her arms. Abigail, she choked out. It is me. It is me. The girl clung to her, sobbing. Gideon knelt beside them. We need to go. More will come. They rode hard, with Abigail clutched tight in Verona's arms. They made it back to the cabin by nightfall. Inside, Gideon sat by the hearth, watching Verona wrap her sister in a quilt. She looked up at him, her face lit by the firelight. You saved us, she said. You found her, he replied. She stood and walked to him. For a long moment they said nothing. Then she reached out, took his hand, and held it against her chest. I came here for revenge, she said, but I found something else. Gideon looked down at her. What? Someone who stood by me. Who did not ask why, who never turned away. He pulled her close, his hand sliding up her back. I will never turn away from you, he said, and when he kissed her, it was not hurried or desperate. It was steady, certain, the beginning of something whole. The wind pressed against the cabin walls like a slow breath from the hills, stirring the edges of the oil lamp flame. Verona stood by the table, sleeves rolled to her elbows, carefully brushing burrs from Abigail's tangled hair. The little girl leaned into her sister, quiet now, her cheeks streaked with dried tears and dust. Gideon ladled venison stew into 3 tin bowls and set them on the table. He didn't speak, neither did they. It had been a long ride back, and even longer days before that. Words felt like something distant best left to mornings. Abigail looked up at him after a few bites. Are you a trapper? I'm a rancher, he said. Do ranchers always shoot men? Verona set her spoon down gently, eyes flicking to Gideon's. Only when they need to, he said. Only when someone's in danger. Abigail nodded once, then went back to eating, her small hand cupped around the bowl like it might disappear. After she finished, Verona helped her into the cot near the fireplace and tucked the quilt over her. Abigail clutched a strip of soft cotton likely torn from Verona's old dress and turned toward the wall. When the girl's breathing deepened, Verona stepped out onto the porch. Gideon joined her, pulling his coat tighter against the evening chill. The stars were clear and cold above the ridgeline. Somewhere far off, a lone wolf called, its voice stretched thin by the wind. She won't sleep through the night, Verona said. She never used to wake before. Now she startles at every sound. She'll mend, Gideon said. Children do. She saw him shoot our father, she said. He made her watch. He said nothing. His hands tightened around the porch rail. I didn't tell you that part before, she added. You didn't need to. She turned to face him then. She needs something steadier now. I can't keep her moving across the land. You won't have to. Verona studied his face. What are you saying? I've got space, he said. The back room could be hers. The pasture's big enough to keep you both busy if you want it. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted to the dark field beyond, where the quiet lay thick between cottonwoods. I never thought I'd let myself be beholden to another man again, she said. I'm not asking for anything. Maybe I want to give something, she said. In time. Gideon looked at her, then really looked. The way her shoulders bore the weight of too many years and still stayed straight. The way she didn't blink from hard things. The way the wind lifted her hair just enough to show the curve of her jaw, sharp and certain as the land itself. I wouldn't ask you to give more than you have, he said. But I'd carry part of it if you let me. She reached for his hand. Not fast, not sudden, just quiet, thoughtful. Her fingers were rough where they met his. I wasn't looking for a place to stop, she said, but I think I might have found one anyway. Inside, a floorboard creaked. I'll check her, Verona said, and slipped back through the door. Gideon stayed on the porch, listening to the rustle of her footsteps, the soft scrape of a chair being drawn close to the cot. Above him, the stars wheeled slow and sure across the sky. He hadn't meant to make room in his life for anyone again. But somehow, without asking, she had stepped into it, and he didn't want her to leave. The next few days passed in a rhythm that felt almost natural. Verona rose early, feeding the mare and gathering eggs with Abigail bundled in a shawl beside her. Gideon sharpened tools, mended a broken gate hinge, and brought in the last of the rain barrels from behind the barn. They spoke little, but what they said mattered. On the fourth morning, Verona found Gideon in the tack shed, oiling a saddle. I want to ride out beyond the ridge, she said. Check the old post road. I need to know they're not still out there. You think they'd come back. I think men like that don't leave things unfinished. He nodded. I'll go with you, she hesitated. Abigail needs someone here. Gideon set the rag down. Then I'll stay. Verona studied him. You trust me to go alone. I trust you to know what you're doing. She blinked once, then looked away. Most men wouldn't. I'm not most men. Half a mile down the old trail, Verona found signs in the dust, a boot print, a broken twig. Someone had passed through, but not recently, and not in numbers. She checked the rise near the old cottonwood, then circled back. By the time she returned, Abigail was sitting cross-legged in the dirt beside the porch, drawing shapes with a stick. Gideon sat nearby, carving something from a block of pine. When Verona dismounted, Abigail ran to her. Where'd you go? Just to check, she said. No one's out there. Abigail looked up at her. Are we safe now? Verona knelt in front of her. We are. That night, after the dishes were scrubbed and the lantern turned low, Verona lingered by the hearth. Gideon was rolling tobacco on the porch rail, the glow of his match flickering once before going still. She stepped outside, wrapping her shawl tighter. I found a spool of thread in the shed, she said, and half a packet of seeds, squash. Plant them near the south fence, he said. Soil's better there, she nodded. They stood in silence till she said, You don't ask questions you don't need answers to. No point, he said. You offer what you choose. I've never had that. You do now. She looked up at him, and there was something different in her face. Not softness, she wasn't built for that, but something steadier, like the first root breaking through frost-hardened earth. I want to stay, she said, then stay. She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her without hesitation, no hurry, no promise spoken. But something firm settled between them, like a gate swung open and left that way. Not by accident. Not because they had nowhere else to go, because they had chosen it. And that choice, quiet and whole, would hold. The first hard frost came 2 weeks after Verona planted the squash near the southern fence. The leaves blackened overnight, curling in on themselves like they'd given up without a fight. She crouched beside the earth at sunrise, her palm pressed to the soil. Still warm beneath the surface, but not enough to save the crop. Gideon watched her from the porch, rubbing the edge of a mug between his hands. The girl had not spoken much since the planting. She moved through the days with the same purpose she'd ridden in with. Only now it was turned toward making the place livable, chopping kindling, stitching torn seams, teaching Abigail to read from a tattered primer she'd found wedged between floorboards. When she rose and brushed dirt from her palms, Gideon stepped down. They wouldn't have grown, she said, not this season. She looked out toward the tree line, voice low. I always thought if I kept busy enough, I wouldn't think about what was taken. Has it helped? Her eyes met his. Not in the way I expected. They stood in silence, breath hanging in the cold air. Behind them, the door creaked as Abigail came out with a wool blanket clutched around her shoulders. Can we go to the river again today? She asked. Verona glanced at Gideon. The stream's low this time of year, he said, but you can follow the deer trail down. I'll give you the lantern. I'll keep her close, Verona said. He handed her the lantern, along with a folded scrap of canvas to sit on. Their hands brushed in the exchange, and neither pulled away. The two sisters set off through the thinning trees, Verona with a rifle slung over her back, Abigail skipping ahead with a pine cone in each hand. Gideon turned to the barn. The last of the hay bales needed stacking before snow came. He worked in silence, only pausing when a crow landed on the roof beam and tilted its head toward him like it had something to say. He didn't care for the omen, but he kept his thoughts to himself. By the time the sun reached its highest point, he saw the pair returning. Verona carried the empty lantern in one hand, the other resting lightly on Abigail's shoulder. The girl's cheeks were red from the wind, but she smiled when she saw Gideon. We found more berries, she said, holding up a handful of shriveled chokecherries. Don't eat them raw, he said. They'll set your teeth aching. I told her the same, Verona said. We'll boil them with sugar. That night, Verona stood at the stove, stirring the berries down into syrup. Abigail sat on a stool nearby, darning a sock with a needle nearly as long as her hand. Gideon fixed the back window latch, then brought in firewood. Later, after Abigail drifted off in her cot, Verona stepped outside, arms wrapped across her chest. I had a thought I'd like to share, she said. Gideon joined her without a word. I've been thinking about the land north of the ridge, she said. There's a slope with good drainage. It might take root next spring. He studied her face. You want to plant again? I want to build something that stays, she said, not just survive it. He nodded. I'll help you clear it. I didn't mean just crops, she added quietly. He looked at her, waiting. I want something that lasts, with you. He stepped closer, not touching her yet, just standing inside the shape of her presence. I thought I'd have to spend the rest of my life alone. I don't want that anymore. She turned to him, her eyes steady. Then don't. When he kissed her, it wasn't hurried, but it carried weight, like the land beneath their boots, like the choice she'd made. Inside, the fire burned low. The wind slipped through the cottonwoods, not sharp now, just cool with the promise of winter. Gideon and Verona stood together in the dark, not needing to say more. They had already chosen each other. That was enough. The snow held off longer than expected. By late November, the earth was still bare, the sky pale and high, and the wind ran dry across the pasture. Verona stood at the edge of the north slope with a post-hole digger balanced on her shoulder, marking the lay of the fence she meant to build come spring. Gideon had helped her measure it with cord and chalk, and now Abigail tied small red ribbons at each corner post to keep the shape in her mind. She said we could keep goats there, Abigail announced, tugging one ribbon tight. The kind with long ears. You'll be the one chasing them when they get out, Gideon called from the wagon where he was loading winter feed. Abigail grinned and ran back toward the cabin, boots kicking up dust. Verona watched her go, her face unreadable. She's lighter lately, she said, stepping up beside him. She's got space to be, Gideon replied, lifting a sack of grain over the wheel. It makes a difference. Verona looked down at her hands, fingers stained from the dye she'd boiled that morning with dried walnut hulls. I keep wondering when it'll feel like we've earned this. We're not owed peace, he said, straightening, but we can build it. She glanced up, studying him as if weighing something not yet spoken. My father never let anyone else plant with him, she said. Said the land had to know your hands first before it'd give back. I used to think that was pride, but now I think he was just trying to hold something for himself. You're not him. No, she said. I'm not. Then quieter, I don't want to hold anything back from you. He stepped closer, the wind tugging at the loose end of the tarp beside them. Then don't. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded square of paper. I found this in my father's ledger. He bought a parcel north of here 2 winters ago, said it was for me when I was ready. Gideon took the paper from her hand. It's good land, he said after a moment, flat near water. I was going to sell it, she said, but now I'd rather use it. He folded the paper again and handed it back. We'll fence it when the thaw comes. You asked me to stay, he said. I'm not going anywhere. That night, Verona laid the ledger on the table and began copying the map onto new paper, her handwriting small and neat. Abigail sat by the fire, weaving dried grass into a doll's head. Gideon whittled a handle for the drawknife that had cracked clean through the week before. You ever think about what comes next? Verona asked, not looking up. You mean after the goats escape and eat the vegetable patch? She smiled faintly. I mean with us. Gideon set the knife down. I've been thinking about building a second room off the back, give Abigail more space. She won't always be a child, Verona said, I know, and I won't always be afraid to trust what we have. He stood and crossed the room, resting a hand on her shoulder. Then let's make it last. She turned to him, fingers brushing the calloused lines of his palm. I've never done anything slow before, she said. Everything's always been fight or flee. We've got time now, he said. We can take it slow. She rose and let her arms circle his waist, her face resting against his chest. The firelight flickered across the walls, and the wind outside finally quieted. In that silence, she said, I want to marry you. Gideon exhaled, steady and full. Then we will. He bent to kiss her forehead, and she leaned into him like she'd stopped running at last. Abigail looked up from her doll but said nothing. She just smiled, as if she'd known all along what the two of them had only just begun to say out loud. And outside, the first snow began to fall, soft and unhurried, covering the land they were building together. The air had turned sharp and clean, the kind of cold that cut through wool and bone but made every sound carry farther, clearer. Ice edged the water pale by the door, and the ground crunched underfoot. Verona stood in the barn stall brushing down the mare, her breath rising in small clouds. Gideon was in the loft above, stacking what remained of the alfalfa. Neither spoke much in the morning. They were long past needing to fill the silence. Abigail sat cross-legged in the hay, sewing buttons onto a cut-down flannel shirt. Verona had hemmed it for her the night before, and the girl had insisted on finishing it herself. Her tongue peeked from the corner of her mouth as she worked, brow furrowed in concentration. Careful with your fingers, Verona said, not unkindly. Abigail gave a short nod but didn't look up. Above them, Gideon called down, We're short 1 bale for December. I'll ride into town tomorrow. It'll hold if you stretch it, Verona said. Not if we get another storm. She didn't argue. She knew he was right. That evening, after supper, Verona set a small parcel on the table wrapped in plain calico. Gideon raised an eyebrow. You said you'd need something decent when you go to the judge, she said. I made you a neckcloth. He opened the bundle and turned it over in his hands, soft blue with a stitched border, neat and even. He looked at her across the lamplit table, something quiet and grateful behind his eyes. I didn't have much to trade for fabric, she said. You made it with your hands, he said. That's worth more. They left for town before first light, Abigail bundled in a quilt and tucked into the wagon bed with a warm stone wrapped in burlap. The road was rutted and half frozen, but the mare moved steady. Verona kept her hands beneath a wool shawl, fingers brushing against Gideon's as they sat side by side on the buckboard. No one said much on the road. That was how they'd grown together, by doing, not saying. By the time they reached the courthouse, the town had barely begun to stir. A man with a broom swept ice crystals from his porch, and a woman in a green bonnet nodded at them from behind a bakery window. Inside the clerk's office, the judge looked over the paperwork with narrowed eyes, his spectacles slipping down his nose. He was a thin man with a trimmed beard and a deep crease between his eyebrows. "You sure?" he asked, glancing from Gideon to Verona. "We are," Gideon said. The judge shrugged and dipped his pen in the inkwell. "Sign here, and here." Verona's hand didn't shake as she wrote her name. When Gideon signed beside her, he laid the pen down gently, as though the moment deserved stillness. Afterward, they stepped into the cold white light of the day, Abigail trailing behind with a small loaf of bread she'd been given by the woman in the bakery. "We're married now," she said, voice matter of fact. Verona looked at Gideon. "Seems we are," he smiled, slow and quiet. "Let's go home." They made it back before dusk. Verona set a pot of beans on to cook while Gideon brought in wood. Abigail fed the chickens and scattered seed for the birds brave enough to linger through the freeze. There was no fanfare, no celebration, only steadiness. That night, Gideon fixed the latch on the back door while Verona stitched patches onto the knees of his work pants. Abigail fell asleep in the rocker with the cat curled in her lap, her breath soft and even. Later, when the fire had burned low and the house was still, Verona sat on the edge of the bed, unpinning her hair. Gideon pulled the quilt back and waited for her to join him. "You never asked about my mother," she said softly. "I figured you'd tell me if you wanted to. She left before Abigail was born, couldn't take the dust, the quiet. My father never talked about her again. I'm not going to leave. I know." She climbed beneath the quilt and let her fingers find his. He kissed her temple, slow and sure, and she turned into him, their legs tangled beneath the covers. "I feel safe with you," she whispered. "That's all I want," he said. In the deep dark of the room, with the wind brushing against the walls and the fire giving off its last warmth, Verona let herself rest fully against him. No weight held back, no part kept hidden. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. Years passed. The goats arrived come spring, just as planned 2 long-eared does and a stubborn buck with a crooked horn. Abigail named them after stars from Verona's old astronomy book. She took to milking before dawn and never once let the pail tip over. She grew into a tall, lean girl with a quiet mouth and quick hands who could split a log cleaner than most men. The garden behind the house doubled in size. Verona tended it with a practiced hand, her rows neat, her soil turned just right. Gideon built her a tool shed with a window that faced the morning sun. She never asked for it. He just built it, and she filled it with seeds and jars and the dried herbs she hung from the rafters. They added a second room to the cabin, then a third. Gideon's hands stayed strong, even as his hair began to fade at the edges. Verona's eyes deepened, her laugh lower now, more certain. They grew old without ever growing tired of the life they built. Some evenings, after the animals were fed and the porch swept, they sat together in the dusk, knees touching, watching the sky shift. Verona would rest her head on his shoulder, and Gideon would run his thumb along her knuckles. Nothing more. It was enough. They never spoke of the fire that had taken her father, or the night she came to him through the chicken wire, wild and shaking. They didn't need to. Their days had outgrown that pain, and when the wind rose through the cottonwoods, the sound was no longer something to brace against. It was home.